Hello, I just want to take 2 minutes before this next podcast to answer the question that Alex Slamberg asked in the last podcast. Alex asked me what would be the first thing that I do as I become a leader. So the first thing I would do is to listen more to people, listen to understand their views and their perspectives and where they're coming at it from, listen to why they come into work, why they want to work as part of this project and part of the team. What do they want their role to be? Really understanding what their values are and what makes them motivated and what inspires them. And once I've understood that, is to help remove blockers from their path and to put them in positions where they can realize their vision and what it is that they want to get out of working in the team, get out of working on a certain project. And like the situational model from Kenneth Blanchard, recognizing the types of behaviors of a leader that is necessary to meet their development level. So if they want to be a project manager, though they haven't got much experience, it would maybe start off with a bit of directing and coaching. Whereas if there's someone that wants to be fantastic at using Civil 3D, for example, or fantastic using CAD, and have a huge amount of experience, well, then I can take a lot more of a supporting or delegating role. So once I really understand what it is that they value and what they want to achieve through listening, then I can action that to help them to get to that, to help support and motivate them, and then tailor my behaviors accordingly to match their development level. So that is what I will be doing as I become a leader on the next project in the next team. And that's what I hope that most people who listen to this podcast every week will take away from this. So that's my view. I'm going to leave you to listen to this week's podcast, which is with Charles Buchanan, and he's a clinical professor from the Ohio State University, and we're talking very much about the technology that is being used at the moment in help train the next generation of leaders, which is a really exciting time. And so I really hope that you enjoy this podcast. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to the 19th episode of the Leadership in Construction podcast. I'm your host, Michael, and today I'm joined by the absolute brilliant Charles Buchanan, who is the clinical professor at the Ohio State University. So Charles, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise. So I just want to start off really, like I do with every single podcast, is understanding a bit more about your background, how you got into leadership and what it is that you're doing today, and maybe what is, if any, connection sort of towards the construction industry.
Yeah, great. So I'm a huge leadership fan. I love it, love to study it. And it all started when I was young in the military. It's such a premium. Everybody was focused. Everybody talked about it. So it just became a part of the culture. I was watching it. So I always knew it was important. But then I was in this one organization, had a fairly significant role. It was kind of middle management type deal. So I saw the senior leaders above me. I got to see what they do, and I got to see what the soldiers underneath me did. So I was right in the middle and got to see it from a bunch of different perspectives. And the organization wasn't doing very well. So we were just, things were not going well at all. It was about to get bad. It goes so bad to worse. And fortunately, the higher headquarters saw that too and came in and fired all the senior people in the organization. So just clean sweep cleaned everybody out and put new leadership into that organization. And overnight, the organization turned around. I'd never seen anything like it. Switching out the leaders, bringing in new leaders, turned an organization around overnight. And at that point, I was hooked. I was so fascinated with leadership and the impact it had on an organization that quickly. And that change led to, it turned that organization into one of the most successful, cohesive, well-ran organizations I'd ever seen. And they actually accomplished some very significant things on a deployment in Afghanistan. So to see that whole transition of bad organization that needed everybody at the top fired to being an elite, high-performing organization in combat, it was just fascinating to watch. And so after that deployment, I put everything into studying leadership, what made good leaders, what made bad leaders, culture, all these different aspects of it. I kept studying it. And that pursuit of that knowledge actually landed me my dream job of teaching leadership at a university level. So I took that curiosity and that passion towards it, and then transitioned it into actually teaching it at a university level. And at that point, that's when I really started realizing how little I knew about it. And so teaching it and learning more and more and more about it, it's an awesome topic. And one of our favorite quotes is, leadership isn't a difference maker. It is the difference maker in organizations. And I truly believe that is the case. So the specifics in the military is part of the infantry. So it's all about the people. The leadership is an absolute critical part of it. You only go as far as you trust your leaders. So that was a big part of what I learned there. And then my last significant position I had was a battalion commander of a tank battalion. So I had machinery and people, and that was just a really cool way to bring all those leadership lessons together, and was just a great experience. And then at the university level, I teach, leadership, teamwork, organizational behavior. My most popular class is leadership and character, which goes into the personal values and kind of leading from within. So that's my most popular class, and it's my favorite one to teach.
I think it actually, no surprise really, with your sort of military background about, your interest in terms of leadership, because so many people that I speak to in terms of leadership, fully enough, mostly from America, they all have a sort of military background. My own CEO for RPS, again, has a military background. And I don't know if it's, you sort of have this perception of the military, or I certainly did, that it's very much just like you command, you just stand at the front and give orders and tell people what to do. And it's not like that at all. It's a very, very different environment. And it has to be. You mentioned a really key word about trust. And I can understand that. You've got to go into battle, you've got to go into trenches, you've got to be able to trust everybody around you and trust that your leader's looking out for you, otherwise you wouldn't go, would you? And I actually find that quite curious. It's that I don't personally see that all the time. It stops when you get to organizations, it stops when we get into the private sector. It's like trust is lost. Is that fair to say? Do you see that yourself, or is that sort of where things start to fall down?
I think it's not lost. It just, a lot of times it looks different, and the cohesion and the brotherhood, the sisterhood, the looking out for those around you, that familial kind of feeling in military units, that really exemplifies trust and brings that forward. It's there in all kinds of different organizations outside of the military. It's probably not as intense as what you see. And, trust shows up in different ways every day, at the office, on the construction site, at the airport, whatever it is, even taking an Uber back and forth, or a taxi back and forth to work. You've got to put trust into that driver to get you there. So it looks different. I think it really is exemplified in the military, but trust is everywhere, or in some cases lack of, in some bad organizations.
I think building trust, particularly in the construction sector, is a tough thing to try and build, and it's not something that I think you can build overnight. I think it's something that has to be built up years. You agree with that?
Absolutely. And when we teach trust, we give a framework, and we put it around the 4 C's: character, competence, commitment, and connection. And character, you have to do the right things. You have to look out for somebody else other than yourself. Without that character, you're not going to be trusted, because you're only going to look out for your own benefit. The competence, when your doctor walks into your room, if you're there for surgery or whatever it is, if they don't have those degrees on the wall, if they haven't done that schooling, if they come in with a dirty set of scrubs and things like that, you're not going to trust them. They don't look like a competent, presentable person. So they have to display that they know what they're doing, and then you trust them. The commitment, we need to know that our leaders are going to be there the same on a bad day as they are on a good day. So we've seen a lot of leaders that walk the walk, but they talk the talk, but they don't walk it on bad days. So when things are going bad, they're usually the first one out the door and run from it. So we need to know that they're committed to it in order for us to trust them. And that fourth one, that connection's the hardest. Connection's all about spending time with people, giving them and building those relationships with them. And it's no surprise we trust the people that we have the strongest relationships with. And that connection is a big part of it. Mm-hmm. So trust is a hard concept. We try to simplify it down to those 4 C's so that people can kind of take it from concept to application and get things moving.
So what are those 4 C's one more time?
It's character, competence, commitment, and connection.
I think that's really powerful. I like the 4 C's. I think that's really easy to sort of remember, easy to action. So I hope everyone's writing that down.
Yeah.
I get stumbled a lot sometimes. You talk about when you saw this dramatic change in senior leadership, and all of a sudden the organisation was doing better than it ever had been before. I get hung up on the difference between management and leadership, because I've got my own sort of views on this, and I think everybody's got something slightly different in terms of the difference between managing management and leadership. What would you sort of define the two, and the difference between the two?
Yeah, I have this debate all the time, and it always goes the same way. I've never met a great leader that didn't manage, and I've never met a great manager that didn't lead. And so I don't look at them as being different. A leader that can't manage themselves and others, they're not going to go very far. And a manager that can't influence people and lead them, they're not going to get things done. So I think a lot of times when I hear this debate, it's people making excuses of not fulfilling their responsibilities of being a manager or a leader, as in that they don't want to deal with people, so they only deal with processes, or vice versa. They don't want to deal with the processes and the details. They just want to deal with people. As a leader, you've got to do what it takes, and you don't have the ability to pick and choose where you apply your skills and responsibilities. You have to be able to adjust and adapt and do what's needed to be successful.
So I think, carry on. No, carry on.
I hate to make this separation, because I would like to see leaders manage and managers lead. And so why give people an out to pick and choose what they do?
Yeah. See, from that, I sort of heard that management is more about the process, and leadership is more about the people. But I suppose it's a bit of mix and match of both, isn't it?
Yes.
I think I like process and procedures, but I'm definitely more about the people side of things. Mm-hmm. But I do know individuals which will be less about the people and more about, got to follow the process, got to do it in this way. Can't. Yeah. I don't know if it's my dyslexia or whatever it is, but I struggle to stick to a structure I just got to, go off with tangents and talk about completely random things. Got to be careful not to do that now.
I'm 100% with you, and that's why I've got to find people to lead that can do that for me. But I still have to. I'm still responsible as the leader to make sure it's done.
Yeah.
So.
So I wanted to talk something that we've mentioned a little bit about the importance around sort of self-reflection. On this podcast before, we've talked about self-leadership, we've talked about self-awareness, and really this starts, I think, with a bit of self-reflection. If I, just a bit around my story, is when I realized my technical competent skills of being an engineer got me so far in an organization. I had to do, when things stopped working, when things started to break down and I realized I didn't possess these leadership skills to keep going or to be at that level that I've been promoted to. I did this self-reflection on what is it about me that I don't possess that the team needs in order to help it grow. And so what is self-reflection? How do you define that? And what are some of the effective things we can do to help self-reflect, and why is it important?
Yeah, one of the key things that, to kind of start with the why, that as a leader, your journey is never over. You've always got a little bit of development that you can make. And the most important part of that development is the reflection. So we learn from our experiences, we learn from, the things that we do. And to learn from it, you have to do those reflective steps, that reflective nature. You've got to really embrace that to maximize the learning. Because we have all kinds of experiences. This podcast is an experience. But at the end of this podcast, if you don't stop and reflect and learn from it, then it was nothing more than entertainment. You could have listened to songs, you watched a movie. There's a lot of things you could have done in this time. But if you stop afterwards, really reflect and think about what you learned from it, then you can apply it. And when you apply it, you grow as a leader. So when you have those experiences, you stop and reflect on it, then that allows you to grow as a leader. But just having an experience doesn't mean that you're going to learn from it. You have to do that reflection, and you have to do it fairly well in order to really maximize the impact of that experience. So the most important part of that reflection is dedicate time. So find a way, carve out time, manage your time so that you have some time to stop and reflect. Wherever you find it, put it on the calendar, protect it, build yourself a nice area of time that you can really reflect on what happened so that you can learn from it and grow. And then when you find that time, personal reflection comes down to what they call the 5 R's: recalling, recapturing, relating, rationalizing, and then redirecting. So when you go through those, it's just taking what was learned and figuring out how you're going to apply that in the future to grow.
This is amazing. We're getting loads of takeaways. 4 C's, 5 R's. This is great. Get to the whole alphabet by the end of the night.
Yes.
But this is, I did this at a very pinnacle point in my career when I needed to sort of change direction. I saw something wasn't going right, needed to work out what it was and go in a different direction. But you could almost, I believe you could almost do this on a daily basis. So one of the things that we started implementing as a team was pre and post meetings. So it sounds like meetings for meeting's sakes, but if we had a meeting, which was almost on a weekly basis with a client, we would have a pre-meeting to make sure that we're all agreed. We've got everything that we need to go present and we know what we're going to say. Then we usually get into the meeting and it all goes to pot and we completely talk about something different and we've thrown a lot of information at ourselves. And usually the old team would go, right, let's go and just straight into it. What we decided, and this might be because we're now, everybody's working in the living room, we're all remote, we don't sit next to each other anymore. We sort of made this conscious decision that after each meeting, we're going to have a an after meeting, a post-meeting meeting, to just discuss and reflect on what was said in the meeting. Did we get the information we needed? Did we handle it correctly? How could we have handled it differently? No judging, really just sort of talking it through and agreeing the final actions, and then how we were going to measure it, and then away we went. So that was quite effective, especially during this sort of time when we were completely remote from working with a team that we were together, and we were working closely before this pandemic. And it's something that we've decided, well, we've got to keep this going. You know, even if we move back into the office and we sit next to each other, it sounds like meeting for meeting's sake, but that daily or weekly reflection on how well do you think that meeting went, what could we have done differently, was just this habit, and it just worked, and it just upped our level of you know, what we were doing, and our professionalism. Would you agree? You know, the self-reflection can be almost on a daily basis.
Yeah, I love that idea. And then, you know, when COVID-19 hit and organizations jumped into the work from home model, organizations started filling all the time. So Zoom or WebEx or whatever platform you used allowed you to go from meeting to meeting without the logistics in between of moving from room to room, or however it was. But there was always a logistical aspect of transitioning from meeting to meeting. And what, you know, talking to a lot of organizations, that was a critical time. That elevator ride, that walk to go grab a cup of coffee, whatever it was, those 5 to 10 minutes before and after a meeting allowed that reflection to happen. You could talk to somebody else in the meeting about what just happened, and you could compare notes. That went away, and people just jumped from Zoom room to Zoom room, and there was no transition points and no reflection on what just happened. So I love the idea you had of putting that dedicated time afterwards to just go back and figure out what it was that happened, so that you can learn from it and then make the adjustments necessary so it's better than next time. So I love that. And then in the Army, we had what we called the after action review. So it was kind of like the 5 R's, but it was 4 questions we asked after every event. You know, what was supposed to happen, what did happen, what went well, and then what do we need to do better next time? And those 4 simple questions, it was ingrained in what we did, and then that reflection allowed us to really learn, embrace those lessons learned, and apply them for the next time. And it sounds like it's you came up with a similar process that I'm guessing is very powerful with what you're doing.
I think so, and especially whilst working remote, I think it helps keep us together in order to make sure that we're on the same lines, because a lot can be lost when you're on audio. Sometimes we don't have webcams, and certainly throughout this whole pandemic, everybody had webcams turned on at the start, and then by the end, no one's got the webcams turned on. So you're only going off by people's voice. It's really hard to really understand if people really heard and listened to what we were talking about. But that reminds me, what you're talking about, the after action review, that reminds me of something else that we do. And at the end of projects, or near to the end of projects, we do this lessons learned review. So we take all the good bits of the project and how we can improve it, and all the not so great bits that we think we can do better at. And we put this into a log. And next time we start a new a new project, we'll pick that up and go, right, which of these lessons can we now make sure that we implement? And only fairly recently, bizarrely enough, we worked in this evaluation part to it, making sure, are we actually learning these lessons, or are we just saying that, okay, we'll try and implement that lesson in this time. We didn't really do it, so we'll try it next time. Really sort of just making a really conscious effort to make sure that we learn these lessons, and this team, but also individual reflection about how our performance is going, and can we do better. And so we try now to make each project a goal of something we can do better. So even just picking one subject, whether it's health and safety, or it's delivery better, you know, try and aim to get some delivery before the deadline, that kind of stuff. We try and pick one thing that we can try and better ourselves and evaluate that. So over the time, the idea is that each project, you know, after several projects, the team is growing and you know, becoming better and stronger stronger as a team. That's sort of how we're doing it. But that sounds very much like the sort of lessons learned meetings that we have.
Yeah, I love it because it, like they say, you've got to learn from your mistakes. But it's even better if you can learn from somebody else's mistakes. Well, that's the same from our experiences. If we can learn from our experiences, that's great. But if I can learn from the experiences you had as well, that brings a whole nother perspective to it. And then, how many meetings have you sat through and somebody afterwards had a completely different perspective on it that you really benefited from, and just things you didn't think about. So the process you're explaining is a very powerful way to develop the leaders and the culture and the organization that you have.
And so we're talking about sort of working more remote, and obviously globally, everybody in most organizations have gone from working in an office side by side with your colleagues within a team unit to all of a sudden having to work in your living room and work remotely. And I know leadership and technology is one of your sort of favorite sort of pet subjects that you've got a lot of knowledge in. How is our use of technology sort of changing team dynamics, organizational culture? How can organizations maintain a culture that they once had, or build a culture? Because at the moment, in my experience, we haven't brought in new people into our team. So we haven't had to experience trying building that rapport and that trust with new individuals. The team that we had during 2020 and into 2021 was the team that we knew from pre-COVID. So, how can we either use technology, or is technology going to be a stumbling block for that?
Yeah, and that technology has been such a big part of our lives for the last year. Leaders adapted; they figured out how to use it to move, to get things done, to move organizations forward. And we're starting to see the results of that is when the workforce is coming back together. So work from home is now starting to be hybrid, different ways of doing it, but people are starting to come back to the office, to the physical locations where they work. And that's identifying a lot of problems. So now we're seeing the lack of attention that we've paid to organizational culture over the past year. So technology has got us to the point where we're at. We leveraged it. We did a lot with it. But now leaders they need to pay attention that the technology will either be a part of the solution or a part of the problem. So leaders need to really focus in on what they're doing with technology, how they're using it, and then think through how they will be deliberate in using it to build culture. Because your organization will have a culture. That is a guarantee. A culture will be established. Leaders can't sit by and watch. They have to be active participants in framing and shaping the culture that's built, or they're going to be victims of it. And some of the things that you're looking at with culture, culture drives behavior, and the behavior is such a big part of the culture. But both of those go back to leadership. So if leaders are building that culture is going to drive that behavior. And with that behavior, you're going to get better performance. So we're really helping organizations right now use technology to develop the culture they need to be successful. So with the technology, we went from survival over COVID to now we can actually build stronger cultures that really focus in on those behaviors that increase performance. So, as we come back to the office, use this technology stuff to really focus in on increasing the performance so that the culture you want and the culture you need is going to elevate the performance of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'd like to know a bit more about the specifics, but just to give you a mini story about my experience throughout this pandemic and culture. So I've had the privilege, I work in an organization which has multiple offices throughout the United Kingdom and Ireland, and the ability to be able to work with all of these individuals within these different parts of the business. I've been able to connect with other people within my own organization and outside of it much more easily. And, even just going down to to training sessions around mental health awareness and other sorts of stuff that they've been rolling out in terms of training, are being able to connect with people sitting in their living rooms in Ireland and people sitting in Scotland and then and the south of England. And it has, in a way, brought a lot of the organisation together, that you don't feel like you're on your own in this big pond, and there's no way to sort of really connect with the wide organisation. I've been in training sessions where we've got MDs and CEOs and admins and receptions from all different parts of the organisation. So being able to connect with that has been, for me, a real privilege. The one thing that, as we start to move slowly back into the office, as you talk about hybrid working, so working partly at home, partly in the office, is being able to actually miss that, not have that connection now with the wider organisation. So I would very much like to see how organisations continue that sort of building that culture and that wider connectivity with everyone, whilst acknowledging some people are going to start moving back into the office, because that's going to be a really hard balance. I don't know if you've had similar experiences or heard of similar experiences to that.
Yeah, that communication, the collaboration, some of the things that we've done with the online platforms has been incredible. So we have to use that, that energy, the benefits that we've learned here, and then bring them back to the office. Because some people have really thrived on these platforms, but some people need that emotional connection, the ability to really work in the same space and share that experience with somebody else. And that, the one thing that's the most difficult to handle over these Zoom calls and stuff like that is the emotional aspect. So that emotional intelligence is one of the biggest voids that we'll have to come back to be able to reconnect with people on that emotional part, the emotional side, and really be that support that was so difficult through COVID.
Mm. Do you think the role of a leader has got harder through the technology?
So I don't know if it's harder, but it's definitely different. So I've never heard of a leader that had an easy job, that everything was just great. There's always, always problems, always issues, always, it's so worth it. Being a leader, it's such a cool part of it. Working with people, that's awesome. But the more you put into it, usually the harder it gets. It's not a bad thing. It's not for everybody. And so I don't know that it's gotten any harder. It's definitely different.
Mm. And where are the biggest gaps do you see in culture that we would have maybe abandoned slightly whilst working? You mentioned about the gaps in the connectivity about sitting with people. I know a few people that very much can't wait to get back in the office and actually sit next to people. And I've enjoyed recently being able to go down to the office and just collect my PPE and then go back out again to actually see the office and see people, and I'm back off now. What are going to be the biggest gaps that we leaders need to be looking out for and watching and really paying attention to?
Yeah, and that question is actually a very critical one that leaders need to be asking, is what do I need to be looking for? What are those indicators that something is not right in the culture that I need from my organization? And so what people are seeing is that misalignment. So the top and the bottom of the organization they've just become fractured. They're misaligned. And so the people at the top, the leaders at the top, know what right looks like. They can describe it. They know what the culture is that they need to be successful. But that communication's been broken over the past years. So they need to go back after getting to the bottom of the organization and being very descriptive of what the culture is, what the behavior is. They need to have a high level of performance. So don't assume that those lessons carried over the past 12 months. We have to relearn some of these skills to have that high level of performance. So to create that alignment, believe it, sell it, demand it. So if leaders can really describe the culture that they want, then they can just sell it. They can train it. They can really go in there and be descriptive to share people's, help align the expectations that people need to act the way they need to behave. And after they've done that, then they can go back to demanding it. But what we're seeing is that leaders come back to the workplace and try to demand the same behavior they were demanding 12 months ago. And the things are different. So we have to go back and sell people and train people to what right looks like before we go to demanding it, because it's just not good for anybody. So the alignment's broke, and we need to get organizations back in alignment. And I believe that Sell at Demand is a kind of a simple framework that can help leaders think through what they need to do.
We talked earlier about sort of middle management, and that's kind of where the position I'm in at the moment. And I think, and you may not agree with this, but the people around the middle management, where they're not quite junior but they're not quite senior, can be a real ally in developing that culture, I believe, because they can see, as you mentioned, they can see further down the organizational structure what it's like, and then what it feels like, and they can also see what's not working further up the organization structure. So do you think that they play a real key role in helping with the organizational structure as a whole?
Absolutely critical. Such a critical role. And leaders have to realize that you shouldn't assume that they know what is expected of them. So leaders at the top can have a big impact on an organization by pulling in those middle managers and being specific about the culture that's trying to be built. Be deliberate, go in there and sell the culture that you want, and use stories, reinforce behaviors, give examples of what right looks like, and then challenge those leaders to be champions of culture that go out there and push that culture at the lower levels of the organization. So getting those middle managers in there, helping to manage expectations, showing them what right looks like, then challenging them to go do the same thing with their people, and then putting that accountability, empowering them to do those things that's how that culture comes back into alignment between the top and the bottom of the organization. Something has to pull that together. And if, leaders have to trust that middle management to do it.
And is there ways of using technology that can assist in doing that?
Yeah, one tool that we've developed to help leaders do that is Elite Leader Alliance, and it focuses in on behavior. So it's kind of like the diet apps, or Calm is a great example where Calm goes after behavior to help you with positivity and mental awareness and mindset. So they use small habit-based activities that help you really have life changes. Diet apps, Noom was a great example, to where they go after behavior-based weight loss and then builds habits, and really very successful app that helped a lot of people lose weight by building those habits. We did the same thing on the leadership side, towards small incremental changes that stick, that build those habits, can go a long way towards building culture and developing leaders in organizations. So break those big complex subjects down into small, actionable daily tasks that help you get better as a leader. So we've seen a lot of great results helping organizations get that culture alignment back and develop leaders through the same program.
This is an app that's available on phones or tablets, or?
Yeah, so that was one of the key things that we found, is that everybody's got a smartphone now, whether it's Android or Apple. 90% of us have it within arm's reach all day long. So we leverage that to be able to kind of push those behaviors to the people and help reinforce them in a positive way, so that we can help them develop as leaders in organizations. So you can find it on the all the app stores, and then our website's the eliteleaderalliance.com. You can go and you can get free accounts and check it out, and use it in your organization as well.
Yeah, it sounds really good, actually, because one of the books I've been reading, and you may have read this, is Atomic Habits by James Clear. and you talk about all these stuff like weight loss things, and it's not essentially a leadership book, but it's a book about habits and how to break bad habits and how to build good habits. And it's been a massive eye opener for me, and I'm only about quarter of the way through. But I expect that the way you talk about it is the more you build on good habits, it becomes a habit, and behavioral habits, it becomes leadership, and good leadership behaviors becomes automatic, becomes autonomous. You should be able to develop it. Is that the sort of basis it's sort of formed on?
Yeah, that is very influential. So that book, and then Charles Duhigg's book on was it Habit? Yeah, there's two books, Atomic Habits, and then I think his book was The Power of Habit. But they're two very, very well done books that we've used, learned a lot from, and embraced their methodology of developing habits over time. Because once they stick, it just becomes natural. And if you could build those habits, it's just a great way to develop as a leader.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Atomic Habits is very early on from the book, there's actionable things that you can do to start to change and to build in habits. And one of the first things is what we've talked about already, which is self-reflection and being aware of those bad habits, and not only will it do you good as being a leader, but also, just in your personal life with being a better partner or being a better father or mother or just, better a team player. So yeah, that's great. And so I do recommend, I don't know, I'm sure you're the same. I'd recommend Atomic Habits to everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. So we're sort of slowly coming towards the end of this podcast, and there's sort of two final questions I want to ask, really. The first one is I want to ask you to ask me a question. It's not one I'm going to answer this second. What I will do is I'll take it away. I'll take a good long couple of weeks or so to think about it, and then I'm going to answer it at the beginning of the next podcast. So do you have a question for me that I could answer?
Yeah, I think the question I would love to hear you answer is, what is next for leadership? So in the evolution of leadership, what's next? I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Okay, that's a good one. Definitely going to need some time to think about that one. So where does that sort of come from, that question?
That's just one of the things I'm fascinated with is that, one of the reasons I got into the technology side was I saw a gap in where leadership development hadn't really embraced some of the technology that's out there. And, we're playing with some AI stuff to help really bring the technology aspect of leadership development up to current standards. And I always like, anytime I get a chance to talk to a leader or somebody that's as passionate about it as I am, I always want to hear their perspective on what do they think is coming up next for leadership. We have to stay ahead. We have to keep driving this change to really help other leaders develop. And I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, leadership is in part always about keeping an eye on the horizon, and if it's not what's coming next for your organization or for your team, and being able to prepare them for that change, what's next for leadership and preparing yourself and your team for that change. So that's a really good question. One I'm going to enjoy thinking about and getting. I'll try and do it justice. So the last question I have is, what do you think is the most important aspect of leadership?
Yeah, the most important is that's a hard quantifier onto this, but the one I would probably bring up is take care of your people. And the reason I say that is that a leader is guaranteed to make mistakes. No one is the perfect leader. You're going to make mistakes, but if you have taken care of your people, your team, then they will take care of you when you make a mistake. I've seen a lot of leaders that used team members. They looked at them as assets and tools that they could use to their own gain. And when that leader made a mistake, that team just kind of sat back and watched and enjoyed the failure of that leader. But I've seen a lot of leaders that made catastrophic mistakes, but they took care of their team, and the team actually fixed it and took care of them and really elevated them through the experience instead of watching them fail. And I always look back at that. That was the difference between a leader that took care of their team and a leader that just took advantage of their team. So I always challenge leaders to really take care of their team, give them what they need, not necessarily what they want, but what they need to be successful and to be, to get their job done and things like that. So give them what they need and take care of them, and it's going to pay off at some point when you need their help or need their support.
That's brilliant. I completely agree with everything you just said. So I want to thank you for this conversation, this podcast. It's been an absolute brilliant time, and tons of great takeaways. The 4 C's, the 5 R's. I think I got that right. Definitely, really important things to take away. So Charles, thank you ever so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for what you're doing. I think there's a lot that people can learn from your podcast, and hopefully they share it with others and pay it forward and keep pushing this to make other leaders better.
Hopefully, yeah, that's what I want to do. Thank you ever so much. You take care.
Thanks, Michael.